Some mornings the courtroom feels heavy before anyone walks in. The fluorescent lights hum, and the wood on my bench is cold to the touch. 31 years in this chair, and I still feel the weight of every single day. And some mornings, before I open a single file, I already know this one is going to stay with me. If you've ever been in a room where someone looked at your record before they looked at your face, I want you to hear this. My name is Judge Harmon. I've sat on this bench for 31 years. Some of what I've seen up here broke my heart. Some of it slowly put it back together. What I'm about to share is one of the second kind. If you're new here, stay. Subscribe, because this courtroom holds stories that no one should have to carry alone, and I intend to keep telling them. It was a Tuesday in early November. The sky outside the courthouse windows was the color of dirty dishwater. Cold rain had been falling since before dawn, the kind of rain that doesn't pour. It just persists, like it made up its mind. 2 other matters had come through by late morning. Both went the way most things go, paperwork, a fine done. Then this file landed in front of me. I opened it. I looked at the name, Marcus Webb, 24 years old, and then I looked at the total, $2,460. That's the number the system said he owed. For most people reading a file, that's just a number. But in my experience, a number like that on a young person's paperwork isn't a number at all. It's a story that hasn't been told yet. The violations were listed clearly. 3 moving violations, 2 expired registration citations, 1 lapsed insurance notice, 7 months unpaid, 3 written notices sent, no response recorded. On paper, it looked like someone who simply didn't care. And I've learned in 31 years never to trust what something looks like on paper. My courtroom that morning had one detail that held my attention. One woman sat near the back of the room, around 60 years old, wearing a dark wool coat that had seen better winters. Her purse sat on her lap with both hands resting on top. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't looking at the wall. She was looking at the door, just waiting. I've learned to notice that kind of waiting. It belongs to people who are expecting someone they love, and it tells you something about who's coming before the door ever opens. Mr. Daly was already at the left table when I came in. He'd been in my courtroom many times. He's a careful man who trusts the documentation and follows the rules well. His notes were organized in neat columns, and his pen was in his hand. He was ready in the way that people are ready when they've already decided nothing will surprise them. I called the matter. I waited, and the door at the back of the room opened slowly. He was wearing scrubs, dark blue, the kind they use in the overnight wing of a hospital. The shirt had a faded bleach mark near the left breast pocket. His hospital ID badge was still clipped to the collar. The photo on it showed him slightly younger, his face a little rounder, his eyes a little clearer. The badge swung as he walked, and he didn't seem to notice it was there. His shoes were white once. They'd been cleaned so many times the color had given up. The soles were worn unevenly on the outside edges, the way they get when someone spends their entire day walking fast on hard floors. His scrub pants had a small dark smudge near the right knee, not from today, something that got there weeks ago and survived every wash. He moved with purpose but without speed, the walk of someone too tired to hurry but too responsible to stop. His hands were what got me. They were loose at his sides, not clenched, not tucked away, just open, slightly swollen at the knuckles, the way hands get after a long night of physical work. There was a faint redness across the back of his right hand where a latex glove had pressed for hours. He hadn't gone home. He hadn't changed. He'd come straight from his shift and walked through my door. His face was young, still soft in the places where life hadn't fully pressed in yet. But the shadows beneath his eyes were deep and dark, the color of old bruises. He blinked slowly under the fluorescent light, adjusting. He looked at me, then at Mr. Daly, then back at me. He didn't look afraid exactly. He looked like a person working very hard to stay upright on nothing. He sat down at the defense table. He had no attorney with him, no folder. He set both hands flat on the table, palms down, and waited quietly. Mr. Daly stood and began his case the way he always does, calmly, precisely. He went through each violation by date, naming the ordinance attached to each one, the rule that was broken. He noted the fines had gone unpaid for 7 months, 3 written notices sent, 0 responses. He said the process had been followed correctly at every step, and the defendant had been given multiple opportunities to resolve this before reaching this room. Then he sat down, closed his folder, and folded his hands. I looked at Marcus Webb. He was still looking at his hands on the table. I asked him to look up. He did. I asked his full name. He said Marcus Webb. I asked if he understood what had just been outlined. He said yes. Then I asked him one more question. I told him to tell me what was going on in his life right now, not the violations, his life. He looked at me for a moment like he wasn't sure that was a real question. Then he began. He said he worked at St. Benedict's Hospital, patient transport, moving people between departments, from the emergency room to their beds, from surgery to recovery. He said, when a hospital is full, the logistics are everything. Back up in one place and you back up the whole floor. For the past 8 months, he'd been averaging between 50 and 60 hours a week. The hospital was short-staffed, he was available, he needed the money. When they called, he went. Now, I want to ask you something, and I mean it seriously. I'm Judge Harmon, and I've been in this courtroom for 31 years. I've learned to tell the difference between an excuse and a reason. An excuse tries to make you disappear from the picture. A reason asks you to look more carefully at it. What Marcus was about to tell me was a reason. Have you ever been standing between two impossible choices where every single option costs something you can't afford to lose? Because that is exactly where this young man had been living for months. Keep watching, because what he said next made even Mr. Daly put down his pen. His mother had been diagnosed with a kidney condition the previous spring. It wasn't life-threatening immediately, but it wasn't going away. She needed medication every single month. Her prescription coverage had run out. The out-of-pocket cost was $312 a month. Marcus said he was the only one helping her pay for it. He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it the way you say a fact you've already made peace with. He'd taken on extra shifts specifically so the medication never ran out. That was why the hours kept climbing. He paused after saying that. He looked at the table for a moment, then he continued. He told me about the insurance lapse, and he looked directly at me when he said it. His mother had had an emergency in August, 3 days admitted. The bill that followed was $1,040, and it came due before his next paycheck. He looked at what he had and looked at what was owed, and he chose the hospital bill. He drove without insurance for 22 days until his check came through. 3 of the 5 violations happened during those 22 days. There was a stillness in the room after that. Not a dramatic hush, just the quiet that settles when something genuinely real has been said. Mr. Daly had stopped writing, my clerk had stopped sorting, the woman in the back hadn't moved at all. Then Marcus said the last thing. He said he hadn't responded to the notices because he'd been working nights and sleeping days for 3 months straight, and the notices had gone to his old address. He'd moved to be closer to the hospital and cut his commute. He found out about this court date when a neighbor forwarded his mail. He came straight from his shift. He hadn't slept. He was sorry. And those 3 words landed on the room and stayed there. I looked at Mr. Daly. He was staring at the cover of his folder, not his notes, just the cover. I asked him whether the specific dates on the violations corresponded to anything in a documented employment record. He said he hadn't been provided employment records in advance. I said that was about to change. I asked Marcus if he had anything with him showing his work schedule. He reached immediately into the front pocket of his scrubs and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table. Then he pulled out his hospital ID and laid it beside it, both flat, like the most important things he owned. The paper was a printed timesheet from St. Benedict's internal scheduling system. Every row showed a date, a clock-in time, a clock-out time, and the floor assigned. My clerk came forward, took the sheet, and laid it flat on the bench in front of me. I found the dates I needed. 3 of the 5 violation dates were on that single page. On the first, Marcus had clocked in at 3:47 in the afternoon and clocked out at 7:52 the following morning, 16 hours and 5 minutes. The citation was issued at 8:21 a.m., 3 miles from the hospital. He was going home. On the second date, he'd worked midnight to 4:30 a.m., and the citation came at 5:02 a.m., 2 miles from St. Benedict's, going home again. On the third, a double shift, clock in at noon, clock out at 4:14 in the morning, citation at 4:49 a.m., same direction, same story. I set the timesheet down carefully because when something that simple tells a story that clearly, it deserves a moment of quiet before you respond. That paper wasn't arguing or pleading. It was just showing the truth, line by line, hour by hour. And when you look at those lines, you don't see a file. You see a person who spent the night moving sick people through a hospital and got stopped driving home by someone who had no way of knowing any of that. I want to stop here and speak directly to you. I'm Judge Harmon, and I've been doing this long enough to know that the system doesn't always ask the right questions. Sometimes the paperwork is perfect, and the picture it paints is completely wrong. Right now, today, there are people sitting in rooms like mine carrying fines they can't pay and stories no one is asked to hear, because justice that stops at the surface isn't justice. It's just administration with a gavel. If you believe people deserve to be fully seen before they're fully judged, share this, because some of these situations only change when enough people decide they matter. I turned back to Mr. Daly. I asked whether he still believed these violations showed willful disregard for the law. He was quiet. Then he said the timesheet wasn't certified and couldn't be fully authenticated in this session. I told him that hospital scheduling systems fall under labor law documentation standards and are among the hardest records to falsify. I asked if he was suggesting Marcus had fabricated this document, put on scrubs, and presented it knowing it could be cross-checked. Mr. Daly said he was not suggesting that. I said, good. He made one final argument. Allowing personal hardship to alter documented violations sets a precedent, and if circumstances can change one outcome, the law becomes inconsistent. He said consistency is what gives the law its power. It was a real argument. It deserves a real answer. Here is my answer. Consistency means applying the same standard of reasoning to every matter. It does not mean ignoring what any reasonable person can plainly see. A consistent court asks the same hard questions every time. What were the circumstances? What was the intent? What does the evidence actually show? A court that skips those questions isn't consistent. It is repetitive, and that difference matters enormously. The law was built to protect people living in good faith. Marcus Webb lived in good faith. He worked. He cared for his mother. He made the hardest financial choice available under documented emergency conditions, and he owned it completely when asked. He came here voluntarily on no sleep, in the clothes he'd worked 16 hours in, with every piece of evidence he could find folded in his pocket. That is the profile of someone the law was built to protect. Mr. Daly looked at the timesheet one final time. Then he sat down and he stayed sitting. I picked up my pen. I looked at Marcus Webb. He was leaning slightly forward, both hands still flat on the table, his eyes steady on me, not anxious, not daring to hope out loud, just present and awake and watching with everything he had left. I told him I was delivering my ruling now and to listen carefully to every part. The 3 violations tied directly to his documented shifts at St. Benedict's, 2 moving violations and the registration citation from the morning after the double shift were dismissed. Dismissed means gone, removed from his record. No fine, no payment, no future consequence. A person traveling to and from necessary employment that serves the public is not demonstrating negligence. The court recognizes that without reservation. The remaining moving violation was reduced to a $60 administrative fee, payable in 2 installments. The insurance lapse required a different answer. I did not dismiss it fully. Marcus had acknowledged it himself without being asked. But driving uninsured is a public safety matter. I reduced that fine to $100, payable in 4 monthly installments of $25 each. No added fees, no interest, payment beginning 60 days from today. The total Marcus Webb had walked into this room carrying was $2,460. He was leaving with $160. I tapped the gavel once. Marcus didn't move right away. Then he pressed both lips together tightly, jaw shifting like he was searching for the beginning of a word. He looked down at his hands on the table and stared at them. Then his chest rose with a long, slow breath. He held it for a moment. Then he let it go, the kind of exhale that comes from someone who has been holding something for months and has finally found somewhere safe to set it down. He looked up at me and said, "Thank you," quietly. Just those 2 words. I wasn't finished. I told him to hold on. I said I'd seen a great many people come through that door, and I'd learned to read the difference between someone who is broken and someone bending hard under weight. Marcus was bending. He had not broken. I told him that running toward other people's emergencies while quietly managing his own, month after month, took a strength that most people never get to show. I told him I hoped he gave himself permission to rest, not because the court required it, because the rest of us need people like him to still be standing. Then the woman in the back row stood up. She said her name was Mrs. Adkins, and she lived in the apartment directly next to Marcus on the 3rd floor. She said she hoped speaking wasn't out of order, but she needed to say something before this was over. I told her it was not out of order at all. She said she'd watched that young man leave before sunrise and come home after dark for nearly a full year. On nights she couldn't sleep, she'd hear his key in the hall lock and think he made it home again. She said she'd never once heard him raise his voice, leave anything in the hallway, or fail to hold the lobby door for someone with their hands full. She didn't know much about courts. She knew what she saw every single day, and she wanted someone with the authority to do something with that information to have it. The room was quiet after she sat down. I let it stay quiet. Some moments need space around them before you move forward. You know, I've thought about what Mrs. Adkins did many times since that day. She had no legal obligation to stand up and say one word. She came because she'd lived next to a good person for a year and wanted that to count for something real. I think that is one of the most quietly courageous things a human being can do. To walk into a formal room and say, I know this person, I see them, and they deserve to be seen. If that kind of moment moves you the way it moves me, pass this story to someone who needs it. 2 weeks after that Tuesday, my clerk set a stack of printed emails on my bench during lunch without saying a word. The stack was 63 pages thick. I counted later. I always count. Someone had shared a brief account through a regional legal newsletter. No names, just the outline. A young hospital worker, a stack of fines, a timesheet from a scrubs pocket, a neighbor who stood up. That was enough. The response was immediate and specific in the way that real things are when enough people recognize their own lives inside someone else's story. 47 messages arrived in the first 3 days. Nurses wrote from 2 counties saying they cried on their lunch break. Parents wrote saying their own children worked those same hours. One retired judge forwarded the account to his former clerks as an example of what the spirit of the law actually looks like. 3 separate employers offered Marcus an interview whenever he was ready. A small restaurant 2 blocks from St. Benedict's sent a handwritten note inviting him and his mother to dinner any night. No reservation, no bill. It wasn't a grand gesture. That's exactly what made it matter. One letter was written by hand on plain white paper. The handwriting was unsteady, like the hand holding the pen had been shaking a little. It said one sentence, I didn't know there were still judges who looked at people. It wasn't signed. I folded it and put it in the left drawer of my bench. That's where I keep the things that remind me what this work is actually for. 17 people contacted a local community aid fund on Marcus's behalf within those 4 days. Together, they covered every remaining dollar. $160 paid in full by people who didn't know his last name. I heard he tried to decline. He said others needed it more. The fund coordinator told him accepting help from people who genuinely wanted to give was part of letting the world be decent when it was trying to be. He accepted. 6 months passed. Then my clerk knocked and said there was a man in the hallway asking to come in for just a moment. Not a matter, not a complaint, just a visit. I said, send him in. Marcus Webb walked into my courtroom a second time and looked like a man who'd had something lifted. Not dramatically changed, just more himself. He was wearing dark trousers and a clean collared shirt in deep hunter green. His shoes were new, not expensive new, considered new, the kind that only happens when someone makes a deliberate and unhurried choice. He stood straight, shoulders level, no longer rolled forward. His eyes were clear, and the shadows beneath them were nearly gone. He looked rested in the particular way that only comes when rest has become a regular thing, not a stolen thing. He'd brought someone with him, a woman about his age in lighter blue scrubs. He introduced her as a colleague from St. Benedict's. He said they'd both enrolled in a nursing degree program with a night school track designed for hospital workers. A counselor at St. Benedict's had pulled him aside 3 months earlier and told him the program existed after word reached her about what had happened in this room. He hadn't known before that. He was starting in September. His voice was steady when he said it, not the fragile kind of excited, the settled kind when something is already real. He stood in my courtroom and looked around it slowly, the way a person looks at a place that meant something. Then he looked at me. He said, this room scared me the first time I came in here. I told him I knew. He said it doesn't feel that way now. I told him that was exactly the point of what we were supposed to be doing in here. He shook my hand. He left. And I sat there alone in the quiet for a long time after the door closed. Before I finish, I want to ask you something I mean completely. Think about someone in your life right now who is caring more than anyone around them can see. someone who gets up before the light comes and comes home after it goes, someone who handles other people's emergencies without recognition or applause, someone who might be sitting right now in a plastic chair in a waiting room somewhere, hoping that whoever sits across from them decides to look up from the paperwork long enough to actually see them. Do you know someone like that? I believe most of us do. Leave their name in the comments if you want to honor them today, because sometimes being seen by even one person is the only thing that keeps someone going. I go home some evenings and sit in my kitchen with the lights low and think about the people who walked through that door over 31 years. Not the rulings or the statutes or the numbers, the people, the way a face changes when someone finally hears them, the way a breath sounds when something heavy gets put down somewhere safe. I've watched that happen thousands of times, and I still feel every single one. I hope I never stop. The law can protect or it can crush. The difference almost always comes down to whether the person holding it decides to look up. Marcus Webb came into my courtroom in hospital scrubs with a folded timesheet in his pocket and exhaustion in his bones, and nothing else but the quiet hope that someone would look at the whole picture before deciding anything. Someone did. That is what this bench is for.